Well, a very newsworthy day at Baton Rouge on Monday. The biggest news that Myles Brennan, LSU quarterback, has officially decided to hang it up and end his football career. First of all, why and what comes next for LSU? We'll get into and so much more on today's edition of Locked on LSU.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked on LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on Twitter at Locked on LSU, and you can also find me on Twitter at Caroline Fenton1, and I'm your host, as I am every day. I graduated from LSU in 2019. I've been covering LSU football for several years, and I'm now a sports talk radio host for ESPN 102.5 The Game in Nashville, Tennessee. But let's get into it because it was a bomb dropped on Monday afternoon, kind of early afternoon, that Myles Brennan has officially decided to hang up the cleats, that he is going to retire from football. And it's beyond just, entering transfer portal. It's beyond, entering the NFL draft. This is, Myles Brennan just looking at the situation and saying, football is just not for me anymore. And so Myles Brennan, who's entering his sixth year at LSU with LSU football, has officially decided to retire from college football. Now, we had Dylan Sanders on the show. That podcast dropped yesterday. We did a full breakdown of LSU's first scrimmage on Thursday. You can find that podcast wherever you get your podcasts, or on YouTube as well. You can find us on YouTube at Locked on LSU. And the first thing I asked him was the very obvious topic that we've all been talking about as fans of LSU football, and that is the quarterback battle. That's something we've been talking about throughout this entire offseason. And that's exactly what I asked Dylan Sanders. And that was the first question I had for him was, how'd the quarterback battle look? And he said, if there's anyone that I can take away from this quarterback race, if there's anyone who isn't a front runner by any means in this quarterback battle, it's Myles Brennan. And while I wasn't incredibly shocked to hear that, I mean, I dropped on the podcast a week or so ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. I gave my official prediction for who would be the starting quarterback for LSU in 2022, and I said Jayden Daniels. I recorded a podcast back in April after the LSU spring game, and I said, look, I think Jayden Daniels looks like he's going to be the quarterback of the future. I understand that Jayden Daniels had a very slow start in the spring game, and that deterred a lot of people from thinking that Jayden Daniels really could be the answer at LSU. I think that his last 2 years at Arizona State kind of scared people a little bit, that he wasn't the quarterback in 2020 and 2021 that LSU fans need him to be, or this LSU football team needs him to be in order to win football games with LSU. But I've looked at the success that Mike Denbrock has had in the past with very mobile quarterbacks. I look at how this team is constructed. I think we're all a little bit concerned or have questions about the offensive line. And of course, Dylan Sanders mentioned it, and we've been talking a lot about this player throughout the offseason, but Will Campbell looks like, as a true freshman, he looks like he could be, a serious force for this offensive line, but it's still a concern of mine, and I think it's still a concern of a lot of LSU fans out there, is how is this offensive line going to be able to protect the quarterback? Well, I mentioned it, and it's exactly why I pegged Jayden Daniels as the starter. Not just the starting experience, of which he has 3 years of, but also his mobility. If the offensive line can't pass protect, then the quarterback is going to have to protect himself. Now, we've heard a lot more of the offensive line coming out of camp, and I have a full camp breakdown for y'all as well. But, that when it came down to it, this LSU team needs a mobile quarterback, and that's something that we've seen from Myles in the past, or at least from the 3 games that he started in his career at LSU in 2020. That wasn't where his strengths lied, wasn't in the run game. So that's why I didn't think that Myles Brennan was ultimately going to get the starting job. And so when I heard that from Dylan Sanders, a big question of mine was, well, if Myles is getting reps with the third team, if you think that, after the first scrimmage in early August, that Myles Brennan is kind of out of this quarterback race, then what does that mean for Myles Brennan? And we learned today That's exactly what that means for Myles Brennan. That he was notified today that he would not get the starting job. And ultimately he said, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. And I don't blame him one bit. I do not blame Myles Brennan one bit. Myles Brennan has been put through the absolute ringer throughout his career at LSU. And he's been nothing but loyal to LSU. He was recruited by Les Miles and then came in to a Coach O in his first year. Lose to Troy. That's not a great, endorsement of the program. Sticks with the program. Redshirts in 2017. Joe Burrow comes in 2018. Joe Burrow gets the starting nod. Myles Brennan takes the backup spot in 2018 and 2019. So, you're looking at already there. He's got 3 head coaches. One that he was recruited by Les Miles, came in with Coach O, and then now Brian Kelly. And then you look at the offensive coordinators. He was recruited by Cam Cameron, came in the Matt Canada era. Then it was Steve Ensminger for a couple of years, then Jake Peetz in 2021, and then now Mike Denbrock. So you're looking at 3 head coaches that he was recruited by and coached by, and 5 different offensive coordinators. That's almost as many years as he's been at LSU, and that's a lot of years. 5 offensive coordinators that he was recruited by and coached by in 6 years. That's a lot for a young and budding quarterback to deal with. So not just the kind of the whiplash that he experienced with the coaching staff, but also, like I mentioned, he came in and he was a very highly recruited and a very highly lauded quarterback coming into LSU. Of course, redshirts in 2017, his first year. He's back up behind Joe Burrow in 2018 and 2019. Of course, we all know how that turned out. Proved to be a pretty good decision. And then in 2020, he finally gets his opportunity. He finally gets to start after being kind of in the shadows for his first 3 years. And in 3 games in, he tears a muscle, an abdominal muscle, and then he's out for the rest of the season in 2020. Of course, Max Johnson, TJ Finley split the rest of the reps in 2020. Myles Brennan gets healthy. Myles Brennan comes back in 2021, is named the starter, and then just right before fall practice starts, he breaks his arm. When he's out, he's fishing, whatever happened, what kind of fluke, weird accident happens, he breaks his arm, and he's out as the starter in 2021. 2022, he decides to come back and exercise the rest of his eligibility. He enters the transfer portal, and I don't blame him. The things with LSU were so up in the air. And a new coaching staff, he saw that as an opportunity to start fresh and start new somewhere else. He didn't get the best opportunities elsewhere. He didn't get great looks. It's not like he was getting an opportunity at another, big-time program. So he ultimately decides to come back to LSU. Decides to come back to it for a 6th year at LSU, a place that really did not give Myles Brennan the best end of anything. He really got the short end of the stick, whether that's injury or, coaching carousel, whatever that might be. Decides to come back for his last year. And Daniel decides to transfer to LSU just sheer days after Myles Brennan decides to come back to LSU. And now he's in this quarterback battle where he was taking reps with the 3rd team. And I don't blame Myles Brennan for being incredibly frustrated or just burnt out about all of it. I don't blame Myles Brennan at all. But I also have to thank him for his unwavering loyalty to this LSU football program. Because he could have transferred whenever Joe Burrow got the starting job, and he didn't for 2 years. He could have got a starting job somewhere else, and didn't. He could have been really frustrated from his injuries, transferred, but he didn't. He actually entered the transfer portal and didn't even follow through with transferring. So Myles Brennan has been nothing but a wonderful proponent and advocate for LSU football. But he's getting married in less than a year. He's got his degree, and he wasn't going to be the starter in 2022. I don't blame him for wanting to go pursue other opportunities and to really invest his time into the other things that he loves. Wedding planning and fishing being one of them, the reason he sat out of the 2021 season. So I don't blame him whatsoever. And I wish him nothing but the best. I mean, Myles Brennan has been nothing but a very kind person. He's been nothing but a very great proponent for this LSU football program. So I think myself and us all as LSU football fans, we should thank Myles Brennan for everything he's done for this program. Wish him nothing but the best in the future. But coming up next, got a kind of, mixed feelings, mixed reviews from a lot of LSU football fans about his departure. Kind of want to get into that a little bit coming up next. But before we do that, I want to tell you about Bet Online. Because Bet Online has got you covered. Fast is an easiest way to check in on all of your needs. You can find all of your betting sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. You can find reviews and news of every league. They've got MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. And now that the football season is starting to ramp up, you're going to need just your one-stop shop app for scores, news, betting information. And I know that on a Saturday or Sunday morning, I just need one app to click and I want to get it covered, and Bet Online is that for you. Plus, Bet Online continues to be the top online resource for all of your sports wagering information. They've got live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They've got you covered. So head to Bet Online today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. Bet Online, where the game starts. Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music. You can find us there. You can also find us on YouTube as well. So make sure to go to YouTube, search Locked On LSU in the search bar. You can find us there. You can find all the podcasts there, and make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a second of your LSU content. But again, the biggest news coming out of practice on Monday was that Myles Brennan officially decided to retire, to hang up the cleats, and he will no longer be part of the LSU football program, which is I hate to hear that. I hate to hear of anyone, very talented young person with what I believe, to have such great ties with the university and with the football program. But it was my understanding that it was nothing but an amicable breakup, to put it, into non-technical terms, with the LSU football program, that he just thought, hey, there's not a place for me here. There's not a starting spot for me here. I've been at this for 6 years. I'm ready to move on with my life. And I can only think that LSU football was more than understanding of that. And I know Brian Kelly released a statement on Twitter earlier thanking Myles Brennan for his commitment and everything he'd done to the team and to the program. And I think that we all reiterate that as well. And Myles Brennan also released a statement. And he said, Tiger Nation, over the last 5 years, I've given all of my body, heart, and soul to LSU football. That is so 100% true. Body, heart, and soul. I mean, he's been through injury. He's been through starting battle. I mean, it's been a really tough road for Myles Brennan, and he could have gotten out. If he had had enough of the switch it ups and the coaching changes and the offensive coordinator changes, but he didn't. He stuck it out. So that's a great proponent to kind of the perseverance that Myles Brennan has. But there have been a couple fan narratives that I've kind of seen swirling around on Twitter, and I kind of want to address them now and give my thoughts on them. First and foremost, a lot of people are confused about why Myles Brennan wasn't in more of a contention for the starting job. Why was it so obvious this early in camp after, fewer than 10 practices? Why was it already so obvious that Myles Brennan wasn't getting those starting snaps? And, and they knew so early on wasn't going to be the starter. He wasn't, sharing those first team reps like Garrett Nussmeier and Gene Daniels were. Myles Brennan was a good quarterback for LSU. You look at 2020, he had 300-plus passing yards in each of the 3 games that he played. He had one 400-plus yard game, and then I forgot which one it was. But he was great in 2020. He had very Joe Burrow-esque stat lines in those 3 games. So, we have that sample size from at least Myles Brennan as a starter. He looked confident in the spring game. He looked the most confident of the 3 quarterbacks, Garrett Nussmeier, Jaden Daniels, and also, obviously, Myles Brennan in the spring game. And, all of that combined into, it looked like a guy who could really make a run for the starting job. But I also go back to, we look at what he did in 2020, which he put up some big-time passing yards. That was almost 2 years ago. Myles Brennan has not played a starting snap in college football since October of 2020. So we can look back to what he was almost 2 years ago. But is that still who he is now? After dealing with not one but two injuries in the past 2 years, was he able to be consistent in the weight room? Was he able to keep kind of the weight on? That was one of his biggest, critiques when he first got to LSU. He was just a skinny guy. He just needed to put some weight on. Was he able to keep up with a consistent workout routine? I'm not saying that he was or wasn't. I'm just asking that question. Was he still able to physically deliver what he needed to deliver to LSU football? That's one of my questions. And based off of what we've heard from camp and that he wasn't taking those first reps, it looks like no, he wasn't. Myles Brennan was entering his 6th year in college football. Was the passion still there? Did he want to compete for this job? Did he have the same kind of blood, sweat, and tears that he wanted to put into competing for this starting job that maybe Jaden Daniels had because he wants to still make a run for the NFL? That maybe Garrett Nussmeier may have as being a young guy trying to make a name for himself. I'm not saying that Myles Brennan was complacent or that Myles Brennan didn't want it badly enough. I'm just saying that if he didn't worth the same amount of effort and time that it would take to compete for this job, then I don't blame him. Then he made the right decision to step away. To say, look, I just ain't got it like I used to. And that's okay. That means he stepped away at the right time. So when people are saying, I don't understand how he wasn't more of a competitor for this job, maybe just physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, he just couldn't do it anymore. And I also understand a lot of people are frustrated or maybe upset that Myles Brennan is stepping away because they wanted him to win the starting job. And I get that. I'm not good with change. I've mentioned that on the podcast plenty of times. And all of these changes going on with LSU football, it's almost like we're all in an identity crisis because we don't know what the identity of this team is. And if you're as diehard of a fan of this team as I am, and I know probably you are listening to this podcast, so much of your emotions and your identity in LSU football, especially around this time of year. So when you have so many question marks about what the rest of the program is going to look like, you almost put all of this emotion into Myles Brennan because he's who we know. And I think a lot of LSU fans were rooting for him to win the starting job because they felt, hey, Myles Brennan is LSU. Myles Brennan is our guy. Myles Brennan has been here. We know what to expect from him. So there was a whole lot of feeling and emotion attached to Myles Brennan. I think we all had pretty naturally. And so also another natural feeling is a little bit of frustration when he steps away. Because this really, truly is, without Myles Brennan, without that anchor that's been with LSU for the past 6 years, we don't have any sort of resemblance of the 2019 team or even the past couple of years. Myles Brennan was like that sentimental anchor into LSU football that's not there anymore. And that's also okay because we can't keep holding on to what it was. And I think we all have to embrace this new future and new wave of LSU football. That even though Brian Kelly doesn't have a Cajun accent and didn't grow up in South Louisiana and Lafourche Parish, it's okay. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe he's the person to take this football team to even further heights. I think we all have to embrace that. And Myles Brennan stepping away is a kind of a scary, emotional, sentimental breakup. But that's okay. And the second kind of narrative that I saw throwing out there was that, shame on Myles Brennan for being a quitter, for stepping away from LSU. LSU needs Myles Brennan, and how dare he abandon LSU in this time. I'm not saying that I'm thinking that. That's just things that I've heard out there in the Twitter sphere. And shame on you if you said that or if you think that. Because Myles Brennan had every opportunity to quit. From when he first came in here to 2018, to when he was back up again in 2019, when he was injured in 2020, when he was injured again in 2021. It would have been really easy to step away from LSU or to quit. And he didn't. So I don't want to hear any of this, Myles Brennan is a quitter, Myles Brennan is abandoning this program. Because he stuck it out with this program when it was really, really freaking difficult to do so. So I don't want to hear any negative talk about Myles Brennan, at least in that sense because he's not a quitter. He's merely pursuing other things. He's been at this for 6 years. If you've been doing anything for 6 years, you're probably getting pretty darn sick of it, or you're just ready to go to that next step. If the chapter is in one area of your life, close it. Open up a new one. And that's exactly what Myles Brennan is doing. So again, wish him nothing but the best. But just wanted to kind of get ahead of any of those fan narratives that, hey, sometimes it's okay to move on. For us as fans, and also for Myles Brennan for moving on from this program. But we got to move on too, because we still got football that's going to be played in less than a month. It's 3 weeks now until LSU takes the field against Florida State, and I know I'm excited. I know you're excited. So what next? What is left to come of the rest of this quarterback competition? We'll get into coming up next. Myles Brennan stepping away from LSU football, but we still got ourselves a quarterback competition. And also another point to Myles Brennan saying he's abandoning LSU. LSU's got plenty of talent in this quarterback room. They're going to be just fine without Myles Brennan. And that's no disrespect to Myles Brennan. That's just a testament to the number of guys and the amount of talent that are currently in this LSU quarterback room. So it was the news about Myles Brennan was first broken by Christian Garrick of WWL. So I want to give him creds there. But also a very interesting aspect of an article that was put out by WWL as well was that sources told WWL that Jaden Daniels was told over the weekend that he would be named with this as starter with Garrett Nussmeier as his backup. Now, I don't know. That's not confirmed by LSU football. I'm not sure if that's been confirmed by any other media outlets. Of course, you could think that that's probably true just because the original story was broken by a media member at WWL. And also because it just kind of sounds like that makes sense. You know, like Jaden Daniels, a guy with 3 years of starting experience under his belt, is named the starter. Garrett Nussmeier, the younger guy, the sophomore, comes in as the backup. That sounds to me like it makes sense. But I also don't think that Brian Kelly or Mike Denbrock or any of this coaching staff wants that to be known right now. Because I still think they want to have a quarterback competition. And I think they want all of these receivers and pass catchers and the offensive linemen to understand each quarterback and how they work. So while I do think that probably is going to be how it shakes out, Jaden Daniels named the starter, Garrett Nussmeier named the backup, that has not been, was put out there by WWL. But LSU football took the field at practice on Monday morning, and Jaden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier did split first team reps on Monday. They both rotated in and out, handing off the ball to a quartet of running backs, and that kind of goes along with my theory of this is going to be a running back by committee, because Garrett Nussmeier and Jaden Daniels both kind of were doing pass-off drills to Noah Cain, John Emery Jr., Monty Goodwin, and Josh Williams. All four of them taking first team reps. I think that goes along with the fact that this will most likely be a running back by committee. But I think the more important thing here is that Jaden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier are splitting first team reps. That even if Jaden Daniels gets the starting job and Garrett Nussmeier gets the backup job, I don't think the quarterback battle is necessarily over. Now, Brian Kelly has come out and said that he does not want to run a two quarterback system where, they might, Garrett Nussmeier might be in there and, in third down situations, or Jaden Daniels might come in whenever, they need to run the ball, whenever passing the ball is an option, so on and so forth. I don't think that's how they want to run this offense. And Brian Kelly has been outward saying that he's used a two quarterback system before and he doesn't want to do it again. But I think that means that even if Jaden Daniels is named the starter against Florida State, if he starts to show poor command of the offense, poor play, he can't take care of the football, whatever it is, he can't deliver on what the job of a starting quarterback is to be, I don't think that this offensive coaching staff shy away from pulling Jaden Daniels and putting Garrett Nussmeier in as the starter. Understanding that if you do that, if you name Garrett Nussmeier the starter and, let's say game 2, if Jaden Daniels can't do it against Florida State, then Garrett Nussmeier is probably your starter for the rest of the season. Once you pull your starter, or at least name a different starter for another game, I think that makes your intentions pretty well known. I don't know how this offensive coaching staff wants to operate. I don't know how Brian Kelly wants to operate. But a true two-quarterback system, I don't think is in the cards. But I think it's a good thing that this quarterback battle will continue to unfold throughout the regular season because nobody can get too comfortable. There's way too much talent between those two for one to get complacent and one to play kind of below the barometer, below the level of what is expected of either of them. Now, I think it's really interesting that they have. Okay, I didn't think that Garrett Nussmeier was going to be in this much of the race. I didn't think he was going to be an actual contender for a starting quarterback. And that's nothing to say about his skill and everything to say about his experience. That I didn't get a chance to see this gunslinger mentality almost kind of mature and graduate into a quarterback with a really strong arm who's able to make some of those risky throws in traffic. And he can also make plays with his legs as well. Of course, Jaden Daniels, I would have to say, is a better runner, is a little bit more of a mobile quarterback, but Garrett Nussmeier still also has that skill as well. So I'm been very pleasantly surprised and pleased by everything that I've heard about Garrett Nussmeier and how he's been able to compete with Jaden Daniels for the starting job. So I think overall that's a good thing. I do think it's going to be very interesting to see if Jaden Daniels is eventually named as, is Garrett Nussmeier going to be, a legend later on in the season? If Jaden Daniels isn't able to deliver, are they flipping the script? Does Garrett Nussmeier ultimately get that starting nod? I think those are all going to be interesting things to see play out in the rest of training camp and also in the rest of the season as well. Also important to mention that Walker Howard, of course, absolutely is in this quarterback room. I can only think that Walker Howard is going to redshirt this year. He took a majority of the reps today, if not all of the reps in practice today with the twos, which is fine. Walker Howard is young. Give him a chance, at least a year, to kind of get into the system, learn the offense, get a little bit of experience, maybe put him in later in the game if LSU's up by a lot. Let him get some of that experience, some of those reps, real in-game experience. But I think that Walker Howard will eventually redshirt this year. So I don't necessarily count him in this quote-unquote quarterback battle, but do want to acknowledge that he is there, do want to acknowledge that he is taking reps with the twos, and do want to acknowledge the fact that he'll probably redshirt, and that's okay. That's fine. There's enough talent in this room that he can afford to sit a year on the bench. But that's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. Coming up on tomorrow's show, the AP preseason poll was released. Where was LSU and where are some of their competitors, and how should we feel about that? We'll get into that on tomorrow's show, but you can get more on the SEC by making Locked On SEC your second listen. Every day, host Chris Gordy and the local experts of Locked On take you across the SEC in 30 minutes. You can make Locked On SEC your second listen. That is Locked On SEC.